chat with Unreal Engine's Nick White, presented by Epic Games. Please welcome your speaker, Nick White.
How's it going? We're in these awkwardly comfortable chairs, sitting backwards, saying it feels like you're in a child seat or some sort, have our legs. Anyway, I'm Nick Whiting. I'm technical director of VR and AR at Epic Games, and with me is Brian.
I'm Brian Rausch. I'm the CEO from House of Moves.
So today we're doing a fireside chat. So what that implies is it's a panel, but much more casual. So if there's stuff you guys want to talk about, raise your hands. There's some volunteers somewhere around here with mics back there and stuff, and they'll get you the stuff. But we're going to kind of just start up. Do you want to do an introduction to House of Moves for people that?
Sure. So House of Moves is it's an animation studio. We're best known for the last 20 years. Over the last 2 years, though, we've been doing a tremendous amount of VR work. We've done 21 projects over the last 2 years from various levels, right? Just motion capture involvement for somebody else to integrate to full integration on our side. So we've got the VR scars. So it's kind of why we're here talking with Nick, because we've been through quite a bit of stuff. So it's kind of fun to hang out.
Yeah, always good. And then like I said, I've been doing VR at Epic for coming up on 4 years, basically. We had the fortune to work with Nate Mitchell and Brendan previously when they were at Form. And they said, we have this little duct tape device that, we think it's pretty cool. You should check it out. So they brought one over and checked it out. And the thing was, they didn't have any content for it. And we, as an engine and games company, had a shit ton of content. So we kind of did A and B and started making demos. So previous to this, I really didn't have any VR experience like so many people in the field today. But it's been a voyage of discovery. But the kind of today, one thing that we did recently at GDC and SIGGRAPH is we started to combine a bunch of technologies that we use for game development and film development into a real-time demo. So at GDC this year, we had a live performance from an actress, and she had a motion tracking suit. We had a motion tracked camera. She had a facial solver, real-time facial solver, looking at her face and bringing all that stuff in real time into the game engine and recording it. So basically recording a real-time cinematic. So I'm going to show you a quick video of that, and I'm going to have to get up out of this really comfy chair to play that.
Can you guys, with the overhead lights on, can you see my bald spot? Is that coming through? Super uncomfortable.
So keep in mind, this is all real-time motion capture and facial capture.
You can't put it into words. A moment when you look into the eyes of the one who is supposed to reassure you, make you feel safe. It only takes an instant. Fear swallows you before you have a chance to make sense of it. And darkness becomes a part of who you are.
You killed him. Her world changed that day when the Northman took him from her. The Senua knows that there is no going back to how things were. That there is nothing to go back to at all. Stay still, stay quiet, hide, don't tell her.
Their gods can see into your mind. They will use this power to destroy you.
They won't stop me. I can still feel him.
Whatever's left of him, they will never let him go.
I'm not gonna let him rot here!
You're the one rotting here.
Leave me alone!
You will die here.
No!
And all your suffering will have been for nothing.
Dillian? Is that you? I'll find you, my love. I promise.
So, like I said, that was all done live performance capture, but we have a really enthusiastic CTO who good enough is never good enough. So at SIGGRAPH last week, we actually decided to bring in Brian and House of Moves, and we did a live captured scene that actually has two versions of the same actress playing two different parts, where she's kind of talking to a mirror version of herself, and then the version comes through the mirror, and it was live tracked around a big, I think it was 12 by 12 foot space.
Yeah, it was you just said big. 12 by 12. It's kind of
not on the scale you guys operate.
No, it was a really cool kind of 12 by 12 space that the actress Mel got to play opposite herself in the same shot. I think it's up on YouTube, and you can go to Facebook. It's actually it's very cool. It's going to change the way that cinematography is done, virtual cinematography is done. Why we were excited to be part of this, we've been kind of working in this world for the last 4 years. We've spent 4 years and more than $2 developing mocap streaming into Unreal. We were doing it in Unreal 3, and it was painful. There's lots of dead bodies and hurt animators and blood left on the ground. But now, you know, our friends at Epic have started to pick this up, and there's this big, great groundswell that's starting to happen. When I show up to a company, I'm like, no, seriously, you guys need to do it this way because it's cool. And I'm not talking about Epic. I'm talking about any company I'd go to trying to do animation. Like, listen, guys, this is really cool, real time. You know, it renders faster. This is going to be amazing. They're like, that's really cool. They don't want to hear it. But when you have a group like Epic that starts to take it seriously, it starts to develop this groundswell that happens. So we're very excited to kind of see this whole thing take off because we've been kind of in this car for 4 years, and we're really excited to have some passengers in it with us now, right? Because we've been talking to ourselves and we sound a little crazy, but now it's this really cool kind of exciting groundswell pushing us forward. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things is when you start bringing these technologies together, you know, it's still early days. I mean, the setup that you guys have at House of Moves is a very costly thing, as I'm sure you're very well aware. But the thing that really kind of got my noodle bacon on this one is the guys at Ninja Theory sent me over a cut of this build where they had pre-recorded some of the animation and facial capture in there, but we'd also tuned it for VR. So I basically put that in the VR headset and then tried to move myself as if she was actually reacting to me. And because of the fidelity of the character and the fidelity of the facial expressions and the fidelity of the body, you really get the sense that there's somebody that's actually human in there talking to you. And everybody kind of keeps talking about, you know, presence in VR, but the presence of another human being on the other side of that is kind of a supremely powerful thing.
It's, and I guess one thing that's probably worth mentioning before we keep talking through is, like, honestly, please grab the microphone at any point because we want this to be open because Nick and I apparently were cut from the same cloth. We prepared for about 32 seconds right before this to have this conversation. So anything you guys can do to help kind of feed and kind of help guide this would be great. You're talking about the presence, and I agree with that entirely because we all kind of have this personal bubble. And mine's quite a bit larger than most people's because I grew up in Utah, right? So I'm used to very open places. So if you're within a quarter of a mile, I'm normally uncomfortable. But I was even looking at that piece that you guys did in the subway station where the two people are fighting.
Yeah, the matinee fight scene.
Yeah. So I was in the Vive helmet with that, and a guy turns and throws a knife. We'd kind of removed one of the guys from the scene, and he threw it right at me, and I felt myself backing up, and I'm like, that's such a cool kind of psychological effect that all of the stuff that we experience in the real world, we're kind of bringing into this when we're robbing ourselves of the real sense and putting ourselves inside of a virtual sense. It's the coolest, and I think that's kind of the, you know, you kind of mentioned the term I use is the Wild West because nothing's been figured out yet. We're all kind of running and gunning through this stuff right now, and that's where I think a lot of the great bits where VR kind of finds its legs and its hooks. It's all going to be in kind of that psychological kind of mining of the human person. You're welcome for that term. Sorry about that.
It's a very technical term.
Yeah, thanks.
You should go into academia, maybe.
Psychological mining.
Yeah.
It's going to be fantastic.
It's more politically correct than some of the terms we use at Epic for messing with people. Yeah, but, you know, kind of going back to the, you know, that presence and the pushing in the boundaries of the animation and fidelity in there, you know, has anybody in here read Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson? It's got to be a few, yeah, a couple of you guys. But, Neil Stephenson, I think, is famous for writing Snow Crash, which is kind of, the birth of virtual reality and the internet. But one of the things that he does in Diamond Age is he has, this story's kind of centered around this girl who gets a kind of a magical book. And what it does is it looks at the environment around her, and the AI isn't trying to make, characters in that story. It's trying to just piece together the story. So she has kind of an abusive stepfather thing and whatnot, so he turns into an evil guy in her little, castle story and princess story. But what they do is, in order to get the fidelity for humans and to kind of go over the uncanny valley, they shop it out to these giant farms of people that are basically just in mocap suits, filling out the parts. So they give them the part to play, and then it's real people on the other side interacting with her through the book. And I thought that was a really kind of cool.
I can't wait till that happens.
I know, right?
It's a huge revenue stream for House of Moves. Just keep us in mind when you start human farming.
So, I kind of see this as, a first kind of toe dip proof of concept of that, because everything was captured in real time directly into the editor and played back. And at SIGGRAPH, we made a full 5-minute cinematic of really high visual fidelity directly in the engine, right? And it's, it blows my mind that there's enough horsepower in computers to do all that today at a scale that we could take it and do it in front of a live audience in 5 minutes. But I'm kind of curious to get your perspective, since you've been doing this for so long. One of the cool things about VR is the reason this wave has taken off is that smartphone technology has kind of driven the miniaturization of screens and processing power and that stuff, and we've kind of gotten a lot of benefits out of that. I think motion capture and stuff is the next kind of jump where we need to get, facial into it and motion capture of bodies to get social interaction there. How do you see the technology that you guys use kind of going into the consumer market?
Wow, it's kind of a tough question. What we do, it's all sub-millimeter and super nerd accuracy stuff. But when you start trying to miniaturize that and put that into a phone or put that into something that's more consumer-based, digestible, it becomes the projects kind of have to match the level of technical. And that's kind of where we are right now. That Senua thing is so beautiful because it's high tech all throughout, and we're able to, there's not a single smartphone in the making of that, right? But when we start talking about trying to do this, and I'm sure Pokemon Go will probably be mentioned a million times at the show, right? Level 23, Team Mystic, just gonna throw that out there. It is, when you start tracking at the mobile level, there is a massive distance in between where kind of motion capture technology has come over 30 years and where the phones are. So the projects are kind of matching that right now. And I'm going to take a half step forward. Forgive me if I monologue here a little bit.
Please do.
I'm starting to get a little bit older, and as I get older, I'm more susceptible to motion sickness, and everything had made me sick until the Vive came out, because it's assisted tracking at the helmet level, right? And that's very important for, guys like me with thick inner ear liquid that can't, maintain ourselves on a sailboat. So that's kind of a half step. It's assisted. So I don't know if, what is the future, right? Are we going to be bouncing phones? So all of us have a phone. Now that means that all the GPSs in here can be bouncing off of each other. Do we start using that to normalize my experience? Because I know where you are, and I know where you are, and I know where she is, right? So now I've triangulated my position. Do we use that to stabilize my world? I don't know. So I think I just answered your question by another bigger, stupider, longer question. But it's cool and it's exciting, and it is the Wild West, and that's why I'm so excited to be in it, right? It's, CG and VFX have kind of gotten pretty normal over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's completely, the barn doors have been blown off of it again.
Mm-hmm. How do you think the economics of it work out? Has Vicon camera setups and whatnot, stayed pretty consistent in their price point, or do you think
so no, that's starting to drop, right? Electronics are starting to drop, the costs are starting to drop, and trying to make cameras that are more consumer level becomes far more interesting. I'm not a Vicon guy anymore. I don't know if we bought the company 2 years ago away from Vicon, so
oh, nice.
I'm not super connected to it anymore. So I did my best to answer that question. Hopefully,
so it's like Kleenex to me, right? Motion capture cameras are called Vicons because of
fair enough. Fair enough. That's good. That's good.
So apologies.
No, not a problem at all.
Looks like we got a question right there.
I have an experience question.
Yeah.
I'm pretty loud. Sweet. I have an experience question in regards to what we just saw in the project you guys were speaking about with the mirrors. I haven't seen that yet, unfortunately. But have you had two people in headsets being captured, seeing each other live in real time? Have you experimented with that yet?
Absolutely. And so help me remember the word experience, because that's something we want to talk about a little bit. Experience versus practical use of VR. I want to make sure that we earmark that. I'm also going to sit forward because too small to be in this chair.
Come on, lay back, man. It's rapper style.
So yeah, we've done multiple people in this space, and there's something about being able to act and react off of another individual, but you're actually looking at their CG representation. Real time has been around for a long time, for well over a decade. But doing real time with full sound effects and visual effects and cloth sim and
Kurt Gardner behind us.
What's that? Wow, that was creepy.
It was creepy.
Being able to do that is something completely new, and it's adding a level of emotion to the storytelling element. The biggest benefit I find to doing it this way is there's a term I've been using for a while called working into darkness. Every time I would rip assets out of Maya and shove them into Motion Builder to do real time, I'm putting human cycles at building something off to the side just to show it in real time to a director. But when I can actually take all those human cycles and keep them inside of my render engine, i.e. the Unreal Engine, that means I'm no longer working into darkness. Every production dollar I spend in Unreal is a production dollar towards my final product because I'm rendering out of Unreal. So I'm no longer working into darkness. I'm seeing a cost benefit of working in the real-time spectrum and rendering out of the world times. Is she going to come up and yell at me? Okay, good.
What did we do wrong?
I know, I got a little bit nervous there.
Yeah, I think before we get to your question, to go on that, one of the most magical moments of VR for me, it's way lower fidelity than anything that they do streaming in real time, but we made a demo called Couch Nights back in the day, where if you're not familiar with it, basically there's two guys sitting in an apartment, and you've got a little like action figures kind of come to life on the table. And the motive behind that was really Oculus was going to debut their DK2 at GDC a couple years ago, and they really wanted to show off presence of another human being in the space. So we were iterating back and forth about a lot of really bad ideas about which content can we steal and from our previous efforts, because we only had like 6 weeks to make it. How can we get a bootstrap ourselves? So we started out putting you in this guy named Owen. That was from one of our tech demos called the Samaritan demo, and he's kind of a gruff, stubbly dude. He lights his cigarette with a blowtorch, badass stuff like that. So that was the only real model we had, so we were kind of like, we got to use him. So we put him in there and had people seated down, and the idea was that since we knew where your head was and its orientation, and we assumed that your ass was going to be planted in a chair, if you move forward and left and right, we could do a very simple kind of 2 or 3 bone icon to get some sort of presence in there, and you could get the head motion in there, you could get the kind of upper body torso motion, and you can do I will say reasonable in a way that probably will make you sick to your stomach, approximation of what the guy looks like, but with basically a single point of tracking. So in the development of that game, I was working with Nick Donaldson. He's in North Carolina, I'm in Seattle, and we spent a lot of late nights working. So like at 2 a.m, he was having some trouble. He was making the game with the action figures in front, and I was trying to hook up that IK stuff for the characters, and in the middle of it, he's like, hey, I can't figure out this networking bug with our action figures, and I'm like, okay, let me just commit my stuff there. It's broken, it won't work, but I needed to get in sync with him so we could debug this problem. So we get in there and we're debugging it, and all of a sudden I look over and his character's like leaning forward like that and looking into the action. I'm like, whoa, I didn't think that shit was actually hooked up and it wasn't gonna work. And there's this moment of realization where he was leaning down and he kind of looks up over at me, and I give him this like what's up? And he gives me this like, what's up back? And it was like this bro nod heard across the country. But even as stupid as it was and as bad as it looked and as low fidelity as it was a magical moment because you could tell it was another human reacting like a normal human would on the other side of it. So there was this thug gangster guy that was actually a scrawny little Australian dude in North Carolina, and I was this dude sitting in Seattle, and we just bro nodded in reality and connected.
That's awesome. I know we had a question. There was also, we should probably earmark that as well, because I think that VR to solve a telecommuting problem is also a very big opportunity in this space, because I telecommute every week from Salt Lake to LA. I guess I commute. I don't telecommute. I actually commute. I'd like to telecommute though, and this
It's
might
like
be a way that
telecommuting
we
with
can,
more frequent flyer points, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, should we go to the next question? Or
Where were we?
Since you were talking about millimeter accuracy, I was actually wondering, like, for that demo, how are you dealing with the IK problems with relating to like the motion capture actor, not quite relating to the uneven ground of the virtual character is walking across?
So I'll answer that question. We weren't involved in that. Was the GDC one. That one wasn't House of Moves. For the SIGGRAPH one, that was House of Moves. But the way that we solve that problem is it's a process called retargeting. We take an actor-sized skeleton, so we'll put like a suit on you, and then we'll go through and we'll analyze the points that make up your structure. We'll build an actor-sized skeleton for you, and then there's a retargeting space that we go through where we go from the actor to the character, and it solves for a lot of that. And then we have some dynamic reaches and things like that that we can do, whether it's done in the engine space itself, or we run it through Motion Builder, or we do it in another tool space. It's a retargeting layer that we'll go through to. But it's a very big deal, right? It's a very tough one. When we started doing this just into Unreal 3, we didn't have a retargeting layer, and it just makes it more difficult when the hands don't quite match, and while the feet were on the ground, the hands didn't quite match. It just kind of pulls you out, and that's one of the things that we're trying to avoid, is pulling people out of an experience while they're trying to direct a cinematic, right?
And I think to kind of go on top of that, I was messing around with this in VR. One of the creepiest things was trying to keep up with her eyeline looking at you. So we had a very, very simple kind of look at controller on there. But even the detail that's required for eye tracking, like if you're off by a half degree or a degree between when your eye flits to something, it's the difference between zombie face and something that's completely engaging, and you feel the madness in her eyes.
Yep. 100%. Well, so at SIGGRAPH, what we do is we would take the virtual camera, and we'd have Mel look right at the camera, and then we would actually adjust the motion capture just to adjust the bone, just to get the head just right before we'd go. And we would do that every single time, just to make sure we were dead on, because it is a very big deal. It's disturbing for all of us that kind of know how people are supposed to look at each other. Sorry, dude. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm an animator, and
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's life.
Me too, right? So I feel your pain.
Yeah, you know the hurt. So I've worked mainly in films, and I'm actually very excited about VR. And have gotten involved in a venture, and I'm realizing that in this medium, since there are no edits, since it takes longer, for efficiency's sake, motion capture and things of that nature are going to become a necessity.
Yep.
It doesn't make sense financially to have animators do that by hand at those lengths.
Yep.
What I'm very curious about, to build on his question about multiple actors interacting, have you found any limitations in terms of what kind of physical interaction they can have, or just are there certain types of performances that you found are still a challenge with our current technology?
Certainly. So there's give and take with any type of technology. We tend to be more optical based, so line of sight. So two guys rolling around in a ball becomes a little bit more difficult. There are a lot of things that are being done to help solve that and make that better. But like any technology space, there is a give and take. You could go to something like an XSEN suit, which is, we used that for a VR piece we did a live show with some DJs. And it was fantastic for that because we had a bunch of flashing lights and stuff like that, but you've got a drift issue, right? So there's always a give and take in all of these things, and it's kind of choosing that right one.
That demo was actually an Xsense suit.
That
for
demo
the
is in an
GDC.
Xsense suit, yeah.
But we had the drift problems as well. Between takes, it's like get her back on center.
Yep.
And
Yep. So for the live show, I'm standing in the back of the room on a telex system going, okay, 3, 2, 1, reset, 3, 2, 1, reset, so we're just getting people to reset all the time. But again, it's kind of working around the technology, but also building the technology in such a way to where you can introduce artists to it and animators to it. Eric Lachelle, he's our lead animator, and he was an animator by trade. And it's very important that we don't try to ostracize the creative. So many people get caught up in the technical. Oh my God, I'm gonna put a helmet on, this is gonna be amazing, and I'm gonna be able to track everything, and I don't need animators anymore. Excuse me, this is my daughter up here, so it's bullshit, right? It's the creative is what drives all of this straight up. You have to have the great tech, but the technology needs to disappear into the background. Absolutely 100%. So I have a very strong belief about creative versus technical. Technical needs to be spot on and unseen, and creative is kind of what we all need to interact with.
kind of along those same lines, I'm kind of curious. We have, out in Seattle, we've just started doing a bunch of VR content production, and we obviously don't have a mocap setup up there, but we do have animators. And for the kind of rough-ins and whatnot, the animator set up he started out with the dual connect setups and the kind of building just to do the rough-ins of the animations. Then he goes back and does a lot of hand touching, but it helps him kind of get the blocking and the framing done with that. And I think he moved on to a more kind of optically based system, but it even how kind of ghetto that setup is, it was enough to get him something that he can work with and jumpstart his normal kind of keyframe process. I'm kind of curious if you've, like the perception or anything like that, these kind of new motion tracking systems that are coming out, and how far down the road until those are somewhere even near acceptable for consumer application?
For consumer application or professional implementation?
Or professional. I mean, the roughing out is kind of an interesting thing because it's an economic savings, right? And you don't need to have the space for a mocap setup, but it's obviously not the same fidelity and quality.
Absolutely. Oh, that's another tough one. I would.
All the hard questions. Sorry.
Yeah. No. It's they're kind of reoccurring questions that I get, but they're always tough to answer because it feels like it's years away before it's. Because even the system that we have, it's not you put a guy in a suit, trigger it, and now you've got animation that goes into an engine. It's all fed through animators. Can we switch gears a little bit? Because I kind of want to try to pick these guys' brains a little bit.
Sure.
Is that cool?
Yeah, totally.
So we talked about experience a little bit earlier. And I'm super interested kind of what you guys have found. Because VR tends to be very experiential right now, right? It's. I think I already told you this. It's like my mom was a liar, right? She when I was growing up, told me I could be anything. This body is not the body of an NFL running back, right? So I could not be an NFL running back, right? So my mom's a liar. I just realized that too. 43 years old, and I just found out my mom lied to me. It's very disconcerting. If there's any therapists out there, we can talk later.
We got the chairs for it.
Right, there you go. I'm almost laying down. But one of the pieces that we did was a piece with the Real Effects guys where we actually made you an NFL running back. And it was a success and fail, and we captured 22 people so that we ran 2 full plays, and we were cutting through lines, we were running through linebackers, and it was one of the coolest things, right? But how many times am I going to run that simulation, right? 4, 5, right? So that's kind of brand standard, and I'm trying to break this down in my head, and I've been struggling with that's kind of brand VR, right? The big NFL people are going to do stuff like that. We did some stuff for American Express and tennis. But these are kind of big brand experiences things. But what gets people coming back to VR? There's a group out there called the Emblematic Group, Nani de la Peña. They're doing some very interesting things on the psychological front, where it's kind of victimology-based stuff, where they're putting you back in situations or letting you experience situations that may not be comfortable, but it's more psychological-based, and those are things that might help people heal from old wounds, and I think that's a fantastic use for VR. Is anybody out here doing anything that's not kind of entertainment related, but kind of an interesting use of VR that's not just entertainment experience? Yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not that unique, but I'm learning how to fly at the moment, so I'm sort of going through my private pilot's license, and it doesn't take, I've got a Vive at home. It doesn't really take much to put it together, does it? I plug it in with Unreal, I downloaded an interior of a Cessna, and I use it to reinforce the lessons that I do during the day.
That's awesome.
It's not exactly
cool.
the same, but it's pretty ridiculously simple to, have your pull controllers and make sure I'm not going to plow myself 20 foot underground. And
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you ask the question, what do people come back to it? And I think it's tricky because I think it's all personal. These experiences are all personal to us, and we all find a use for it. When I grew up, I used to build stuff out of Lego, and I'd build anything from Lancaster bombers through to castles to whatever. Giving people the ability to do that. You talked about creation. Giving people the ability to easily create stuff. I think that's one of the big futures of VR.
Yeah, okay, so kind of like, can I say Minecraft? But kind of, the Minecraft and the VR space, but even what was happening right before us, right, where a group of people would get together and they would build,
The fantastic contraption, that's such a fun game.
Super cool, right?
It's one of my favorite VR experiences.
Oh, yeah?
Because it lets you it's like Legos on crack. I mean, I would say for adults, but, being able to create these crazy contraptions and let them go around. It's really fun, and especially in VR when it's much more visceral. Like that style of game has been around for a while, but when you do it in VR, suddenly you're taking this toolkit that doesn't really exist in reality, and you can do all sorts of crazy, fantastical contraptions. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that's one of the reasons like Epic has been working on a VR editor so that you can go into VR and kind of place things around and do kind of simple tasks in there. And one of the reasons we do that is just to make it kind of more accessible for people to build their own world. Like when you pull up Unreal Engine 4, it can be intimidating, right? It's a professional tool set for professional people, but you can go into the VR editor and point at stuff and move it around and scale it up and scale it down. And all those concepts are the exact same concepts you'd use in the 2D editor, but it's in kind of more of an accessible, friendly way. So it's kind of the first steps towards something like a Minecraft. If you imagine building a little small game framework on top of that and then being able to point at stuff, connect up simple logic, like if I point at the switch on the ground, maybe it brings up like on trigger, and then you can drag that over to a door and say, so when I step on that switch, it opens the door, stuff like that. Those simple 1-2 interactions are kind of based upon, we have the blueprint system in UE4, which is a visual programming language. I can imagine the next step of that is connecting logic up in VR, so people that don't necessarily or get intimidated by the tool set can just kind of jump in and start and put those pieces together.
That's very cool.
And it's kind of amazing what you do. Before I did VR, I did the visual scripting thing. So teaching people that don't have a programming background to do things that would normally require a programmer is something I spent a lot of time doing. And one of the biggest things when you talk to people like, hey, why don't you program? You obviously understand the flow of the logic and stuff like that. And it's like, when I pull up a text editor, basically I can make a typo. It's a big white screen. I don't even know where to start. But, if you ask them to step to the problem, they always go through a whiteboard and start drawing boxes and arrows, right? So we're like, why don't we just speak that language to people? And I think VR is the next step of that language. Everybody interacts with the real world all the time, so we're very used to it.
I don't know if you found it, but a lot of the most capable developers that I know are actually dyslexic.
Really?
Yeah, so that also helps with that as well, right? Because it's no longer, it's now completely visual, so that's actually pretty fascinating.
Interesting.
Sorry, man, you had a...
I wanted to comment about your thing, but I love the VR editor. I'm it's really a learning curve though, but whatever. Anyway, no, to your point about staying in VR. I mean, so I left the AAA game industry to work now for a company that's doing enterprise and education stuff. Oh. And we have a product called Sidekick that's similar. Like you go into this world that's you're a quarterback. And like within 2 seconds, you're hit, which like the first time I did that, I was like, I have no ability to ever be a quarterback because my reaction time is not like that. But what we're doing, yeah, you're right. It is kind of a brand experience that somebody's going to look at once or twice and be frustrated and want it to not be reality. But where we're approaching it is high school football teams buying the products to use it again and again and again to actually learn. That's play one. How can I get better? That's play two. How can I get better?
Oh, interesting.
So I think that you'll get longevity in that kind of training environment. But entertainment, I agree with you.
So does that also help them know where to hit, like the whole heads-up initiative type of stuff? The concussion removal?
No, it's just about the motion of the players and the ball and where to go in this given play. So it's like a flight simulator, except it's in this play we know that our team is going to do play number 1. The other team might do this, this, or this.
Right.
Where should you go?
I mean, but at the end of the day, right? I mean, you really could introduce those when guy starts to flash red. That means that you should have your head up at this point, kind of stuff.
That's true. That's
very
pretty
cool.
inspirational. Huh. Yeah, it's neat. I mean, there's no physicality, so people just clip through you, but you know whether you're dead or not, basically.
Yeah.
Play some intense sports.
I don't know.
It's really interesting. But to the, do you mind? I don't want to monopolize, but to the subject of the whole visual scripting thing, so I just took this job where the company has the sidekick thing. While I was trying to figure out whether to start a company or take a job, I was on a sales call with a partner with a big animation studio, and we were pitching them this thing that lets 2D animators bring their assets in and make a VR film. And then the Unreal thing came out, and it solved like half of the problems that were going to cause our project to be expensive. And we haven't closed that deal, and we probably won't unless we build something. But that's exactly what we were thinking, is build a framework on top of Unreal that is easier to use for people who are like 2D animators. They're not even working in 3D. So I love Unreal,
Awesome,
but I think you're right. I mean, I just wanted to agree with that point about frameworks on top.
I think it is a good point too. I'm a programmer, so my art skills are pretty much non-existent, and my animation skills are absolutely non-existent. But one of the things we're playing around with is how do we make the different tools in the editor more accessible, right? We released the base version of the VR editor early because we wanted to get a lot of feedback because. At Epic, we use our own tools, but we use our own tools in a very specific way, and it really benefits us to deal with people and get feedback from external people that have different workflows than we do. We have a lot of kind of institutional knowledge and shortcuts built up around using Unreal Editor, so we wanted to get it out at an early stage and say, hey, are we on point with this, or is this completely batshit crazy? What's the deal? But now that we've kind of gotten it out there and gotten the feedback, one of the things we're looking at is how to make workflows that were previously inaccessible to people more accessible. So if I wanted to rough out a very simple animation using our kind of default character, what's to say I can't go up to him and pose him by grabbing his arm and saying, put your arm over here, pull your elbow over here, which is something that I would have to learn, some DCC tool to do normally, but I can go in and grab somebody and move them around to the position I want them to be, click a keyframe, and then do a very simple rudimentary interpolation. I think that's a very powerful thing is, half of the game development process, and especially with VR, since we don't have a whole huge, kind of canon to draw upon of content, is what works. We have to kind of get there, rough it out, see if it's successful, and then give up on it if it's not successful, and take our lessons and move on. I think getting more and more of those tools out of the hands of specialists so that we can at least rough it in, get the ideas, and then give it to the specialists and have them spend their time much more wisely really kind of changes the economic proposition, but also changes the innovation proposition for creating this sort of content, especially in the experiences section, because people tend to be very specialized. Like, if you go to an architectural company or an automotive company or a film studio, they're very heavy towards, we have a lot of animators and VFX guys, or we have a lot of engineers, or we have a lot of architects, but not a lot of them outside the game industry kind of have the full stack of everybody required to make these experiences.
Right. I think right behind you had a...
This was quite a while ago. The conversation's progressed about this, but you were talking about experiences initially, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this. There's a lot of limitations with what we really normally speak of in virtual reality is the HMDs, the headsets, the visualization, some audio, whatever. When in reality, in virtual reality, we have this virtual world which we're trying to simulate, and there's a lot more involved than just what we see. Everything from feeling motion that we're not getting, unless you're inside your space. We don't have a tactile, the world is not tactile. We don't really have a real world space to interact with. Even the controls really aren't natural. They're getting better, but even then, how are we going to come across, to interact with every possible scenario? You're not going to get a controller that's going to do that, at least in the near term. What are your thoughts on going forward with that? I mean, I have my own, my company's basically looking at solving that entire stack in a solution, and I'd really love to hear what your thoughts is on that.
Wow. So, I mean, yeah, obviously there will be, Ready Player One haptic suits, at some point in the future, right? And right now, it's fascinating to me when I spend time in VR how forgiving I am of what's going on because I'm tricking my brain. I found myself, we were doing this cartoon show, and I was in this cartoon world just throwing slime everywhere, which is what's not awesome about that, right? But I realized when I took the headset off, I was actually in a dark animation pit, right? And my emotions dropped a little bit, because I was in this really bright, kind of zany world, and I was into it. So I think that there's a certain part of forgiveness that we have in this world, and I think that there's going to be a fine line that we're going to walk. I don't know that I have a real great kind of, well, what I would do is develop this. I think it's more of just a comment about how forgiving the human brain is when we start tricking it like we are with VR. I think gloves will get there pretty quickly, right? We'll have the headset with the glove jack, and then the gloves, we'll be able to put feedback into the glove sensors when we touch things so we can solve at least a tactile issue. I don't think that would be too far away, right? There's already collision-based objects and things like that, and there's really no reason we couldn't feed information into. Actually, I think they already have a glove that does that.
Couple different people working on that.
Then a lot of the things that we're also doing to trick, right, is if you're driving a car and you push on a pedal, you've got the fans that kick on, and we've got the sound. It seems like if we trick enough of our senses, the other senses follow suit. I don't know if that's right. It just seems like that to me right now because I keep tricking myself, and I don't know if I'm not at the point of being jaded in VR, right? So once I reach that jaded point, that might change, right? Legitimately, it just might change. I'd be like, okay, been here, done that, let's move on. Do I need to trick another sense, right? So when I've finally tricked all 5 senses, we've got 100% immersion. I don't know that I answered your question, but I actually think it's a very... Yeah, right, so that might be the deal, yeah.
If you had an answer, you'd be a very rich man.
Yeah, let me think of one then, if that's the case.
Let's keep it between us.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating.
I think it's funny. One of the first times I went to House of Moves, actually, you guys had a setup where I think it was a UE3 title where you could grab props and stuff and move them around to different pillars. And I thought that was so awesomely cool. It's still kind of the standard, right? Because you're manipulating a physical object that's roughly the same as in the game, right? The ideal is interacting with the actual object.
Yep. Yeah, one of the coolest things about that for me, and I think that a lot of this will get fed into the VR space, but we had that, I think you saw the whole building thing where we had what we call our smart prop, where we had a fifth view of Unreal. So we normally shoot quad cam in Unreal to where we have 4 virtual cameras going so we can just start cutting back and forth. And then we have a fifth view or a sixth that go into our smart props that normally play our drones or our non-human objects or our whatever, but our hero ends up underneath this abandoned building, and we had destructive objects all over in this abandoned building, and we could hand people this controller, and they could actually sit and fire lasers in the real world, which was then blowing up all of the, they were basically playing a video game in our mocap space. Utah. Have you been to the Void yet? No. Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous, right? Because it's literally right down the street from my house, and I haven't been. But yeah, I'm gonna go check that stuff out too, because that's very cool, right? It's right in the same. It's in the same neck of the woods. We're doing ours around linear storytelling and experiential VR stuff. But I love kind of what they're doing, putting you and tricking the brain, right? I mean, so it's going to be the visual tricks that they're doing are super cool. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think the other part about it, at least coming kind of from the games background, is that people are very good once you teach somebody a skill where you're mapping something to another action that's happening somewhere. People get that and they grok that. So like, when we play video games, you want the character to jump, you press A, and then after you do it, a couple times, you're no longer thinking about pressing the A button, you're thinking about making the character jump, and you get that kind of muscle memory for those mapped actions. And I think that's very similar in VR. You can fool people just enough, and as long as the reactions are perfectly consistent with what the user's intent are, that the brain making that mapping fairly quickly and the experiences happens really quickly. So, some of the cooler ones that I've seen are, sword fighting games and stuff in VR, people that are doing experimenting with that. You don't obviously have a sword in your hand, and you're probably not very skillful if you do, but doing the gestures and interpolating to a set animation that does something close to what the user's intending, as long as they can pull that off very consistently, or casting a spell with a wand is another one that seems to be pretty popular.
Can you cast that spell again? That was very masculine.
Woo!
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Bam. I'm Harry Potter. I'm a very experienced spellcaster. But, once people learn those analogs, it's very easy for the brain to get over. So I think a lot of it is, like you said, fooling your senses enough and keeping it consistent enough. That's really what we found, is as soon as the player does the wrong thing after they intend it, even if that means chopping down the number of actions you can do, it's better to have fewer actions with a higher degree of accuracy than a whole lot of actions that may closer match the motion, but that have a 10% chance of failure. Users like, oh, this is broken, or I don't want to do it again because I don't want to risk messing up. So I think it's kind of a combination of physicality and retraining that brain.
I'm super bummed. There's only like 1 minute and 36 seconds left.
I thought it said
it said like 20 minutes, like not 3 minutes ago. I swear.
It is 2:04. Wow.
Crazy. But so, shoot, because the other thing I wanted to talk about was the potential for isolation in VR. I was setting up for this DJ thing that we were doing, and there was another guy that was setting up as well, and he was basically looking at this white wall, sitting by himself on a chair, looking at a white wall, and this is what I'm seeing, and I'm like, it's the saddest image I'd ever seen in my life.
The loneliest DJ in the world.
Right? Yeah, I know. And going on in there, it was probably fantastic for him, but like the actual kind of real world setup. So anyway, I wanted to talk about that, but I don't think we have enough time to do it, because it's staying away from the very easy to isolate humanity inside that. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about as well, and I would love to talk more about that, but clearly not now.
If you're very profound, we do have 35 seconds left. If you can cram in.
But it was more feedback for me, because I am, I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and it's just, having a collection of people in here that think about this stuff as well. It's such a great opportunity.
Since we have 24 seconds left, do you want to do one quick fire question to end it off? Does anybody have something awesome or stupid to ask? Or awesomely stupid?
Well, regarding that, I firmly believe that, like others have said, VR is the ultimate empathy machine, right? So I think in our storytelling, we have to bring the crucial themes of our time, which are not being addressed in mainstream media. We need to elevate the conversation we're having as a society, and play with the radical notion that if all people of the world stretched bonds of solidarity between each other, we could abolish war and accomplish great things together. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to gamify social change, right? Because gamers are the only demographic in the world that have time and money on their hands, and that's what you need in order to change the world, right?
That's the concentration of profundity was very.
Have you put any thought into this at all?
So yes, I think about this constantly. I think about this all day, because I don't want, the internet distracted us, and when it was supposed to bring us together. VR can isolate us and make, Ready Player One, and The Matrix. I mean, if we don't, elevate the conversation we're having by including these things that are occurring right now, and gamers are so used to us, saving the world. They're so used to saving the world. We just need to gamify that and tell them that they're gaming for a purpose, and proceeds of that go to NGOs that work in environmental and humanitarian, areas. That could spread a lot of good.
It's like Ender's Game, but instead of destroying an alien civilization, you're saving our own.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting. Come on, can you give us like 5 minutes?
Yeah. Social change right here. VRLA. We need a good hashtag for that. Yeah, but I mean, I completely agree to your point. I think one of the powerful things that, if you look at the kind of history of narrative and storytelling in plays to movies and whatnot, empathetic development with characters, there's always an abstraction with previous media because you're watching something on a screen or you're reading something in a book in your imagination. But when you're there acting with another virtual reality character, if they're even somewhat believable, that empathetic connection is magnified great extent, and you have the power to actually bond with that character.
I would just add one thing is that in this very dense and short amount of time is that I think the gameplay mechanic that will help us to do that is philosophy, because shooters, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. Every problem looks like a nail. But if you have dialogue, narrative, choose your adventure type things where what you say is what is the gameplay, right? If we philosophize that, and Plato talked about this 2,500 years ago. If we don't do philosophy, if we don't do history on a daily level to understand our context and our place in the world, we're lost, and we're manipulated, and we're caught up in the rhetoric of whoever wants to, dictate the discourse. But if we understand, our place in the world through history, through philosophy, what is justice? Are we living justly? Can we be more just? If we're part of an injustice, even in a small bit, are we responsible for that? All these things. I think if we can make story out of that, that would be very engaging. Yeah.
So the interactive element of, sorry, I guess I should try to speak into this, right? Part of that is people interacting, right? That drives the story forward, i.e. not having a guy facing a white wall by himself, right? It's two people facing a white wall together, but together. But it's not to make light of it, though. I do think that's a pretty interesting thought process. That game mechanic, trying to think through that's pretty brutal because that's huge. Right, it's massive.
But you finally have the tools for that, right? If you can capture the subtleties of that human communication, right? That's something that's not necessarily been possible with.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
That ended on a very deep note, but that was, I think, a very good note too. So we got to wrap up because we're being
yay
kicked
VR.
off. Yeah, yay VR. Thanks everybody for coming.